Abigail!
Hey!
Tell me about these trees behind you. I feel like you're in some kind of amazing Earthjustice treehouse right now.
You know what? I actually am. Behind me are beautiful live oaks of the East Bay that are protected trees, and they make it crazy to build here, but they are the most, I feel like they're the sentinels at our house.
The oak trees.
The live oak trees. Oakland used to be full of live oak trees. These were.
Okay, also, Abigail, I feel like I've got full body and you've got just head. Do you mind turning your camera down a little bit?
Yes.
There
we go.
Boom. Okay, we got to see that blue tunic. All right, so thank you everyone who's tuning in right now. My name is Manny Cutiel, and this is welcome to Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations. We are continuing to civically engage the public in this time of need. That is our goal and our mission. It's what we're all about, and we're doing it here. This is our second week. And the point of these conversations is to give you the information that you need and to engage with civic leaders all over the world. And also in the chat box, there's a link. It's joinin.org/o/Manny's. Please help me by supporting my small business, clicking on the link and becoming a sponsor. And today we are honored to be joined by the amazing Abigail Dillen, who runs Earthjustice, which is the largest environmental advocacy organization in the country. Did I get that right? The world or the country? Let's just the world.
I think it's the world's biggest public interest environmental law firm.
Okay, amazing. Law firm, right? And so before we get into the meat and potatoes of the subject, which is defending the environment while sheltering in place, can you give us just a sense, Abigail, of like what does Earthjustice do? If you could tell us about the network of lawyers that you guys have, like what is the mission of Earthjustice?
Sure. Well, you may have seen our tagline. It's because the earth needs a good lawyer. That's never been more true than right now. We represent over 600 clients around the country and around the world, always for free. Mm-hmm. We work across three big areas, from climate and energy, healthy communities, protecting our lands, wildlife, and oceans. And of course, all of those things are very intertwined, particularly as we face an existential climate crisis.
And I feel like this is such a beautiful moment because you were, I think, like the first or second speaker to actually come to Manny's when I first opened it up. And you spoke with Adam Werbach about Earthjustice and the state of the environmental movement. And it's so wonderful to, a year and a half later, have a conversation with you again. Unfortunately, the circumstances are not ideal, but it's really nice to see your face, and it's just really good to hear from you. And what can you just tell us about the last year and a half and some of the work that Earthjustice has been doing, kind of fill us in as we get to the conversation at hand?
Sure. Well, Manny, it's so great to see you, and the whole project that you're doing. It's everything we need right now. So
thank you.
And you're rising to this crisis too. It feels like years ago now because it's been such an intense time for our society, and I think between the time that we last saw each other in this context and now, the environmental crisis that we're in. I mean, we've lived through wildfires here in California, 2 seasons. We've seen the pace and scale of superstorms continue. I think we've seen an emerging consciousness around the emergency that we're in. Our language has changed. I think even a year and a half ago, people were still talking about climate change and climate disruption, and now we're talking about not even a climate crisis, a climate emergency.
Right.
And then, of course, as we're here today, we're layered on top of this terrifying pandemic. And I think what makes it more terrifying, and the through line I see between this moment of sheltering in place and what I do every day, is just an abject failure of federal leadership.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. Tell me about why you're seeing that more acutely now, given the pandemic.
Well, because I think if you're glued to the news and you're glued to the reliable sources of public health information like Johns Hopkins or even the CDC expertise that's allowed out, the federal government is acting too slowly. Yeah. It's not giving us the ventilators we need. It's not giving the hospitals the beds they need, the healthcare workers the protection they need. It's all contributing to a sense of self-help by the states and by us individually. And this is a moment where we need each of us to practice responsible social distancing, but we also need our government at the very top to be coordinating a very fast, very aggressive response,
Yep.
and one that isn't only caring about the state of the markets, that's caring about future for you and me and everybody else, and particularly the most vulnerable people.
Right.
And that whole constellation of worry is exactly what's animating the climate crisis too. And people will say, well, we're just the US, but the US is the wealthiest country in the world, and how we choose to exhibit leadership influences the whole global response. And we're in this perfect storm where an abject disrespect for science,
Right.
self-serving, corrupt disrespect for science is driving these two emergencies.
Right. So you mentioned the federal government. I wanted to ask you, I've been meaning to ask you this. We just had this immense opportunity for the federal government to step in and financially support the country as it goes through this time. I think it was $3 trillion. Were there efforts to advocate to have major investments in green jobs, green infrastructure, and fighting the climate crisis within that stimulus bill? And if there were, how successful was that advocacy in getting provisions made to help fight the climate emergency?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. And obviously, we're at a point where we're seeing government spending at a scale that certainly hasn't happened in my lifetime, and I know it hasn't in yours. I'm older.
It couldn't be done. No one was going to spend that much money on it. All of a sudden, we were able to figure it out.
All of a sudden, we were able to spend money. And I want to just say first and foremost, before I get to the environmental issues, that what we're dealing with right now is a health and safety and economic crisis for everybody in the country. So I am really relieved that Congress is moving and spending money. And as we spend trillions of dollars, we're either investing in the infrastructure of the past,
Right.
or we can choose to make those investments that we know we need. And so when I think about industries in trouble, I'm worried about the wind and solar industry coming through this time stronger than ever. And so we're absolutely advocating for a package of incentives that basically support the future. And there are some across the board kind of spending that will help everybody.
Right.
And we haven't got that kind of, I think, climate future lens incorporated yet. I do expect there to be, this was the third COVID package last week.
Yeah.
There'll be COVID 4, COVID 5, maybe COVID 6, different things on the Hill. We've worked with environmental justice leaders around the country to come up with an awesome set of spending prescriptions that would really help get at water safety, clean air, jobs, basically a jobs and justice.
Yeah.
And what I love to see, and this is something that's changed since the last time we talked, Democratic leadership and even some bipartisan support for this frame. And I think I'm really optimistic about seeing a lot of that spending emerge in the next infrastructure package.
Great. And I just want to take a second and thank the over 100 people who are currently watching us have this conversation at 1 o'clock on a Monday.
Amazing.
It's very encouraging. So thank you to the over 100 people listening in. If you can go ahead and click the raise your hand button, I'd love to see who's here. And so please raise your hand. And then also, if you have questions for Abigail or thoughts or ideas, but specifically questions for her on what's going on right now to protect and defend the environment, you can just type your question into the Q&A box. You don't have to wait till we get to Q&A. You can type your question in now. We're just going to talk for about 10 more minutes, and then it's going to be your questions. This whole party is only going to last 30 minutes. So feel free to type in your questions now. So one of the things we were talking about, Abigail, before in our little pre-hangout call was this thing that's coming up a lot, that I'm hearing a lot, where people are saying, well, oh, gee, look, as tough as all this is, like there's dolphins in the Venice canals and there's coyotes on the streets of San Francisco and the ozone hole is getting smaller. And, one of the unintended positive consequences of this is that the environment is finally able to recover a little bit. So, it's exciting, but also it sits kind of strangely with me. And I feel kind of uncomfortable thinking about this pandemic in those terms. So
I agree. It's emerging in a very perverse way and strangely kind of reinforcing this idea that the only way to protect the environment is to tank the economy and people's living standards.
Right.
And I know that isn't true.
Yeah.
So while I'm
Yeah.
glad that we are getting a break from pollution, this is not the way. And we're just living through an unadulterated tragedy right now. So
Yeah.
I don't take anything positive
Yeah.
from this pandemic. What I will say is that we're looking as an organization and as societally is what are the things that we're having to do now that are becoming possible that we can take with us?
Yeah.
You know, if it turns out we can actually connect like this remotely and
Yeah.
stop flying, great. Let's carry that habit with us. If we can suddenly put on the table huge political investment in our society and our social fabric, let's remember that and do it, because these will be the decades to do that. And yeah, I mean, I think.
What other habits do you think might because a lot of the work of the environmental movement is also trying to create cultural shifts in the way people think and act and behave. And I'm young, I'm only 30 years old, but I can't imagine a time where we've had such a swift requirement for our culture and our society to change its habits and behavior. And so what do you think might be some results of this as it relates to the movement that you're currently one of the leaders of?
I love the point you're making. I am a strong believer in this idea of behavioral contagion. And it isn't that you change the world just through small actions, but it's that everyone starts reinforcing the small actions that speak to the larger actions. And then it becomes this virtual circle that engenders social change.
Yeah.
And I think engaging in social distancing, like taking responsibility for habits that are like complementary to a sustainable future, it lends itself to that model.
Yeah.
Again, you know, this idea that we're going to come together as a society to support each other, we just haven't had that mindset or worldview for so long. It opens up, I think, huge possibilities in a really consequential election year.
Yeah, and maybe just in a smaller version, I don't know that San Franciscans or folks in the East Bay necessarily had this problem, but there is certainly a greater appreciation for the natural world that's coming out of this, when the very little respite that we're able to be provided in the time of social distancing are time out in nature. And gosh, aren't those walks so wonderful?
I know, protecting open space. And also, you know, I was thinking one more thing. We were talking about the Venice canals, and there's this sense I encounter all the time, and especially among young people who know they're inheriting this mess that's been created of hopelessness. And I always think there are just so many examples I'm aware of because of how I've chosen to spend my career, how quickly nature can regenerate if you give it a little space. And we're seeing that in the space of weeks. If we can take some hope from the fact that if we can just take a bit better care of the planet, it can, I don't want to overstate it. We're in tough times and we're in the midst of a biodiversity crisis, but that restorative ability is amazing.
Okay, so another thing you mentioned in our pre-call, for those who are tuning in, we have a little party right before. It's 5 minutes. It's very fun, and we always chit chat and catch up and spill the tea and the juice and the gossip. And we didn't do a whole lot of gossip spilling, but we did talk about this. And I wanted to point it out. And you mentioned that a lot of people are actually using this as an opportunity to continue to do really bad stuff. Those are the words you use. You know, people are trying to sneak in some really, really terrible things right now as it relates to the environment, and you guys are working on all cylinders to fight back. So can you tell us about how people are trying to use this opportunity in a negative manner and what you're doing to fight against it?
Sure. Well, I mean, since 2016, the name of the game for the Trump administration has been to roll back every single environmental gain that we've ever made. Certainly all the gains that were made during the Obama administration, and they're digging into the basic bedrock of environmental protection and science and sound economics. And so there have been over 100 rollbacks, 135 plus maybe 140 cases against the administration now. What I want to say is at this time of fear, we're winning those cases.
Great.
And So, you may see the bad rollback in the paper and you may not hear that we stopped it. Sometimes the wheels of justice roll slowly. We just won our Standing Rock suit case on DAPL this past week. So just know that we're working all the time. We're challenging this stuff.
I heard about that. What happened with DAPL?
Well, basically, our cases continue. The pipeline was allowed to proceed, and the judge had basically trusted the federal government to come back with good analysis, and they came back with shoddy analysis, and he said, well, damn, these people have won their case, and we're going to brief now whether this pipeline should be shut down.
Amazing.
Whatever the result is, tribe has been vindicated, and we'll be able to get some mitigation protection for water. I feel really confident about that. But so we're doing what we always do. And, some people might think, well, the whole place all paused. This administration is not pausing its agenda. So tomorrow we're expecting to see a full rollback of our clean cars rule, the most important climate set of regulations that have ever been accomplished in this country. Mm-hmm. Week before last, we saw this secret science rule move forward. You may have seen news about EPA just doing an across-the-board order suggesting that, if you're having trouble complying with environmental regulations, you get a free pass.
Really?
If you look at the wording, it doesn't seem...
Just during this time or
just during this time, but what it invites is basically non-compliance. It's a excuse in advance.
Yeah, you don't have restaurants all of a sudden not have to follow health code compliance during this time. They still have to, I got a letter from the health department saying, listen, if you're going to keep providing food, you still need to make sure you're following all of health code. In fact, even more. So
right. And there's some things like it can be hard to get things to a lab, or there are certain things that industry genuinely is struggling with, and you could have a tailored sense order. This is a free pass. Yeah. And it's a free pass from an administration that we know is on the side of polluters. So it's like a red flag to the bull, in our view.
A quick logistical question for you.
The way it's getting worse.
How many lawyers do you have in your network total?
And it's an organization, so everyone works full-time for us, always for free. We have 160 plus lawyers, and we have 400 staff, great communicators, great lobbyists on the Hill and in state houses.
So I guess, I interviewed Chesa Boudin, who's our district attorney in San Francisco, and he was talking about criminal justice in a time of social distancing. So I just logistically, you have all these lawyers who are fighting these cases. How has social distancing and shelter in place affected their ability to actually fight in court against some of the actions that are being taken to destroy our environment?
Yeah. Well, so far, most courts, they may not be having jury trials, or they may not be having arguments in person, but they're still going ahead with briefing deadlines. And so the work is still coming right at us. I mean, the good thing about being a lawyer in a time like this is basically all you need is a laptop. Mostly you can do electronic filing. Yeah. So we can still do our work. But I just want to say, to everybody who's on this call, to everybody who works anywhere.
Yes.
Sheltering in place, at homeschooling at the same time, family care at the same time, and people are struggling. Everyone's struggling to make this work, and the pure anxiety and uncertainty is making it hard. What I feel so lucky we have is purpose and this focus. We know everybody's counting on us to keep watching and to keep our guard up and to keep filing the cases, and we are.
I just have two more questions for you that have come up in my mind. One is looking back on this time, and I think it's important. I think it's really important for activists like yourself and myself and the people on this call to be focusing on what we do now, but also we have to imagine and envision once this is over. Do you think that we will look back on this time and think that it worked in favor of the environmental movement, or did this set us back?
I'm constantly seeing these dramatically different possibilities right now. And so if more people can be like you and take their civic engagement and leadership seriously. And like, we don't all have to be as brilliant and full-time as you are, but to really take get the vote effort seriously, to really take civic engagement, conversations, kitchen table, attachment to social change seriously in this moment, and really fight back. I mean, there's an article about this in the New York Times today. Authoritarian leaders around the world are taking advantage of a crisis to consolidate their power. So this is a time for people to be on guard, putting our precious little energy on top of everything else to stay engaged.
Yeah.
If we can do that, I think we will look back on this time as a watershed moment when we got our act together.
Yeah.
If we can't do that, it could be very bleak.
So that, I guess, brings me to my final question for you, which is, it felt like trickling down to, the layman like myself, it felt like the last year was a year where the climate movement utilized public space and physical presence to push the issue to the forefront. I'm thinking Greta Thunberg, I'm thinking Jane Fonda getting arrested, I'm thinking of the Sunrise Movement disrupting Democratic conventions and showing up in Dianne Feinstein's office, and literally people sitting there, and all of the climate strikes that were happening with people physically not showing up to school. And so what the environmental movement did so well, I think so effectively in the last year and a half, was use the physical body, use the physical presence that people had to push this issue to the absolute front of consciousness. And so now we're all kind of stuck in our apartments. What advice would you give to all the people who want to keep organizing and keep fighting, who cannot organize rallies and marches and sit-ins and go to Dianne Feinstein's office, or not show up to school? School's not even happening. You can't show up to school. So how do we reframe that activism and that organizing?
Yeah. Well, I think everyone's really asking that question right now, and I don't have the prescription. I'm just the lawyer, but I'm someone who's deeply interested in making our movement much more powerful. And I think there were two things going on. I think it was the juncture of taking space, as you're saying, but also climate change is taking space. The escalation of emergencies it's hitting home for people. And unfortunately, that's not going to end. I think this is the first year where, at least in the Democratic primaries, climate was an issue number one, right up there with healthcare. And I think we're also, I'm really interested in, I try to, my news feed is filled with climate, but I'm just trying to I'm reading so many papers just to keep up with the pandemic that I don't usually read. And I'm really surprised to see in wall-to-wall necessary coverage of COVID, climate is still coming up as maybe one or two top stories in whether it's Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times, certainly is in my social feeds. So I think we're just going to have to figure out things like this to continue to make sure that it's not dropping. And the parallels between the bad governance that we started with, Fox News, their irresponsibility around climate change and this pandemic, are making a lot of those parallels. It's the time to, I think, lean into the parallels.
All right, so I'm going to get to folks' questions. If you have questions, you can type them in now. Elizabeth wants to know, Abigail, what are the biggest or most realistic opportunities for a transition to a more sustainable future that you see as a result of the economic disruption? And how do we make sure that happens?
Well, I think we have a roadmap of what will work both to take the carbon out of our atmosphere and support the economy. And it's an electrify everything approach that has a ton of investment and jobs that go with it. It gets back to your question about the stimulus. If we could be revving up our economy with the investments that we need in not only 100% clean power, which I think there's a lot of work left to do, but the economics of clean energy are so much better going that direction. But we need huge work to electrify our transportation sector and get gas out of our buildings. All of that takes investment.
Right. All right. Divya wants to know, how do we prevent the country from returning to its unsustainable baseline state once this crisis abates? How do we create a new normal instead of just reverting to the previous status quo, which I think Whitney Walker is also getting at, and a lot of people are basically getting at. Like, some folks are saying, hey, I know we don't want to equate tanking the economy with helping the environment, but how can we not just go back to the ways we were and actually use this as a way to change our behavior for the long term?
I mean, it's a choice, and it's going to take huge political will to invest in the solutions of the future rather than propping up the fossils of the past. And I think we have to be clear-eyed about, we know we need to just transition into a sustainable future. And so, if there are places in the country that are deeply reliant on dirty energy, for instance, directing this money into those economies, into Appalachia, into the Gulf states, with a vision for what the future is the only way.
How Caroline wants to know, just on the same topic, is like, how do we fight against that narrative that ties economic devastation to environmental progress? I mean, what are ways that we can fight back against that false?
There's no factual support. It's a fully false narrative. So if you look at the history of any country that's regulated any part of the economy for pollution control, make the air, water cleaners, deal with climate, it always results in economic gains. It is the most maddening false narrative that continues to gain ground. Now, when we're talking about climate change and climate solutions, it requires such huge shifts that there will be winners and losers, and we have to look at that clearly and think about who's losing their jobs, not assume that a unionized job in the oil and gas fields is the same as a rooftop solar installation job. It's not. So we've got to be clear about making sure that people have a place to land and that we support our whole.
Right. Yeah. Sarah, so this is going to be the last question. I think maybe one more after this. Sarah wants to know, since the news has been so dominated by the coronavirus, what environmental news stories are slipping under our radar that you think we should be paying attention to? I like this question. You kind of dapple, but what else?
Yeah, probably some other wins. I mean, for all the Californians out there, we just won a great case that reins in oil and gas in California. We're one of the biggest oil and gas producers in the country. It's our dirty secret, is this progressive state. We're winning really great advances for clean energy all around the country right now. I think if you're paying attention, you know that our record against the Trump administration is really good, and that we're winning our cases as they try to roll back. Just keep that in mind. Like, you're hearing the bad news, but you're not hearing the good news that we're winning.
Yeah. All right. Last question from Zach Subin. State and local governments have been showing some promising leadership on decarbonization, but now they're going to be challenged fiscally and logistically. How can we keep supporting local and state governments and keep the momentum going in what might very well be a time of austerity coming up? And I think New York, Andrew Cuomo said this yesterday. He was like, listen, I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it. Like, there are going to be deep cuts. So how do we make sure those cuts don't actually also roll back the progress we've made on decarbonization and the environmental movement more broadly?
I mean, I think there's a real chance that we could backlash into something worse than we started with. And just because it will seem easier and we're trying to get back to where we were. To prevent that, we just need to marshal all the political will we can. And it's the problem that we always have. And I think we will benefit by the real consciousness around climate that has emerged.
Awesome. Operator, will you put the Earthjustice link in the chat box for the over 100 people who are here listening in right now, and as well as the Join It link? I just want to say how proud I am and how honored I am that so many people have tuned into this conversation. Clearly, it shows that we are thinking about not taking our eye off the ball as it relates to the environmental movement. right now. So I want to just do a quick plug for Earthjustice. They're doing amazing work and they could use your support right now. So click the link in the chat box to donate to Earthjustice and to sign up to help out with them as well. Also, I run a small business. It's a brick and mortar business in San Francisco, and we've had to shut down, and it's a really tough time for us. So please do donate to Manny's. Dig deep, even better, become a sponsor. It's $36 a month, and it allows us to continue doing this programming for everyone for free, for the public, to inform and engage everyone that wants to be engaged and informed at this important time. Abigail, I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you do, and I really appreciate you and your leadership.
Oh, likewise, right back at you. You're performing an essential service to all. So much, Manny. It's great to see you.
All right, keep up the good work, and thank you everyone so much again. Tag us at Welcome to Manny's if you want to tag us. It's at Welcome to Manny's, and thank you to Sam for being our operator and Ram for running the Manny's team. Thanks everyone. Have a good day. Bye.